What's up, everybody? My name is Joe Brown, and this is Heresy Financial. Today, I wanted to share with you some of my unfiltered thoughts on the direction that we're going in terms of what to me looks like opposing positions of taxing the rich versus caring for the poor. And at first glance, it might not seem like those are opposing positions, but more and more so it looks like they are. And so we're going to dive into some of those thoughts and look at what the differences are and why those differences matter from a moral perspective, which I don't usually get into a lot on this channel, and then also from an effectiveness standpoint. Ready? Let's dive in. All right, so the first thing that I think is very important that needs to be said is that I truly believe that individuals who have the capability have a moral obligation to help those in need. I 100% believe that. So nothing in this, I need to say that first because nothing about what I want to discuss here has anything to do with me thinking that we should just leave people who are less fortunate to fend for themselves. That is not what I'm saying at all here. I really honestly believe that if you have the capability, there's a moral obligation to help those in need. So that being said, there are two ways to approach this. Both morally and from an effective standpoint. So let's go with the moral side first. The way that things are being approached right now, the slogan is "tax the rich," and it's punchy and it conveys some very strong emotion, and it also paints an enemy that you can blame the problems on. The problem is it's the wrong direction. Because like in the words of Thomas Sowell, I've never understood why wanting to keep something that I've earned for myself is greed, but wanting to take from someone else what they've earned is charity. It doesn't make sense. And so taking something from somebody else who is better off by force has no impact on helping those who are less fortunate. Now, you might say, well, it does if you take from that person and give to the person who's less fortunate. Okay, we've had decades worth of being able to see what government does with money and the amount of money that makes it to the places, to the people that are in need, that are hurting, is minuscule compared to what's been taken. First of all, second of all, when you force charity to happen, it no longer is charity. And so you might not care if it's charity or not, as long as money's being taken from those who have a lot and given to those who have a little. But it ceases to be generosity. It ceases to be charity. It ceases to be giving when the voluntary aspect of that is taken away. All it is at that point is theft. And we can talk about social contract in a moment, but if there's two people in a room, or three people in a row, I'm sorry, and two of them hold a vote to take something that belongs to the third person, you've got a majority vote. Just because something is chosen democratically via a majority does not make it moral. Does not make it moral for you to take what belongs to that third person. And so the very fact that you have a tax system that has voted to take something that belongs to somebody else and give it to somebody else does not make it moral. Now you can say, okay, well that's the society you've chosen to live in, and that's where you get into the debate about, or the conversation about, having a bottom-up structure of government, which is how America was started, or having a top-down, which is every country. And it's like then the argument is, if you don't like the way it is, just leave. That's easy to say, but especially in America, it's very difficult. How many of you have ever left the country? Ever? Very few Americans ever leave the country. If you want to leave the country, even just for a vacation, it's very difficult, especially right now. Do you know how long it takes to get a passport if you don't have one right now, if you're not just renewing an old one? Even if you're renewing an old one, but let's just say getting a new passport. It takes months right now to get an appointment. And if you have children, that's even harder to get passports. And that's just to leave, not even like leave permanently. That's just to like go on vacation, leave temporarily. And so once you cross that hurdle, then it's like, okay, well now leave. Let's leave permanently. Stay a citizen, but let's leave permanently and just go live somewhere else. Well, that doesn't change anything because you still have to pay taxes. And if you're gone for enough of the year, I think it's 360 or 330 days a year, something like that, then you don't have to pay taxes on the first couple $100,000, or maybe it's like $105,000. I don't know what the exact number is. You don't have to pay taxes on the first amount of money that you earn from the states, but then you have to pay on the rest. And so you're still, unless you meet very strict qualifications, you're still having to pay taxes. That throws the whole social contract argument out the window because you're not a part of that society anymore. You've left. You're not a part of it. You're not taking from it. But you're still being forced to contribute to it. And then you have to ask, okay, well, what if you really want to actually leave, like expatriate? Well, that's getting very, very difficult these days. You have to go through different appointments. It costs money. You have to have another citizenship already established, and unless you have a family member in your ancestry close enough in a certain country, or you have the wealth in order to be able to purchase a citizenship somewhere else, that's very difficult, next to impossible for most people to accomplish, which basically means that only the rich, the very rich, or the well-connected, or just by luck, are able to actually leave and give up that social contract in exchange for another social contract that they like better. And so when you look at it from that standpoint of like, okay, well, this is the society you chose to live in. Well, I was born into this society and you're making it almost impossible or very difficult for me to leave. Then the whole idea of tax the rich because that's the society that they chose to live in and give it to the less fortunate, that from a moral standpoint, like and then the argument being thrown out the window of if you don't like it, just leave. From a moral standpoint, it starts to fall apart. And again, I need to reiterate, I do believe 100% that if you have the capability, you have a moral obligation to help those in need. But if you have never given to those in need, if you are not actively donating, if you are not actively being generous and helping those in need and giving to the poor, you have no right to have any say in what other people do with their money. And no, making laws or coming up with ideas on how to have other people get their resources taken from them to give to the poor does not count. And so I'm looking at you, Congress. It does not count. You are not yourself helping the poor by writing laws or changing laws that take resources from other people and give to the poor. That doesn't count. So unless you can show me how much money you've personally given to the poor, how much money you've personally donated, how much you've personally helped those who are less well off than you have no moral ground to stand on to make decisions about what other people do with their resources. Zero. Now, so that's kind of the moral side of things. Now let's look at the effectiveness. There is a reason why ever since 1971, inequality has grown dramatically. Go to WTFhappenedin1971.com and you can see all sorts of problems that have gotten worse, and the turning point was right around 1971. So where am I going with this? It's not necessarily about gold, it's about sound money and the restraint that sound money places on a government. When there is a restraint on spending on a government, they can't keep on spending and can't keep on doubling down on failed policy, failed procedures. When they fail, they run out of money at some point. They run out of resources. And when we closed the gold window, left the gold standard, and had the ability then to spend as much money from a government standpoint, they can spend as much money as they want. Suddenly you have a massive explosion in all sorts of issues that contribute to widening inequality, contribute to things like mass incarceration, things like, most of the wealth, the productivity of workers has skyrocketed along with GDP, but most of that wealth has not been proportionately shared with most people. That's typically gone to the it's been very unequally distributed. And the turning point was the early 70s. The reason for that is because you have policy errors that that contribute to inequality that are paid for by this unending checkbook for the government. And you have things that are counterproductive in terms of policy. That you come in and you try and tax the rich by increasing taxes on salaries. Let's say, well, what do the rich do? They stop taking salaries. They own assets, and so the people who have the means to do so are always going to be able to find their way around laws that you put in place, because they're the ones that are making sure that these new laws that get passed, or the changes to laws, aren't detrimental to them. And so if you have like the superhero Thor, his superpowers come from the hammer, and in the first movie, Thor says take away Odin says take away Thor's powers, and whoever is worthy can wield this hammer. And the idea from that is Thor wasn't worthy to wield those powers. He had negative effects from those powers, so strip away the powers, and then he had to become worthy in order to get those powers back. The wrong move would have been to take that and increase the power of the hammer and leave it in Thor's hand and hope that the hammer then is able to wield Thor, right? That's the wrong move. So if you have the wealthy and corporations who are wielding the government as their hammer, wielding the government, making those laws self-serving, it's the wrong solution to make that hammer more powerful, because they're still wielding it and they're sending it in the direction that they want. And so it's the wrong move to increase the power of the very thing that corporations and the wealthy are wielding. If they are able to the extent that corporations and wealthy are able to wield the government and laws in self-service and use that power for their own gain, the only solution that makes sense is to reduce that power and take that power away from them. Because every new law, every new regulation that gets put in place has some sort of mechanism that feeds back where the incumbents are able to use it to their advantage to a greater extent than what competition would be able to do so. And so that contributes to this self-reinforcing mechanism where wealth flows uphill ever and ever faster. And I've talked a lot about inflation and how that negatively impacts the poor and positively impacts the wealthy. So we don't need to get into that. But the point is that every time you have, you can look at, it's almost comical. If you have something that the government's trying to fix, you can almost guarantee it that the solution that will be employed will be counterproductive to that end. And when you look at the incentives, it makes sense, because if the war on terror was over in a year, then the war is over and the money stops flowing to pay for the war. So the war on terror is going to continue. If the war on drugs was over in a year, all the money would stop flowing to fund the war on drugs. If the war on a certain illness was over within a couple of weeks or a couple of months, then all the money flowing that direction to fight the war on that certain illness would stop flowing. So if a government has the power to give themselves more power to deal with an emergency, that emergency will continue. If the government looks at a problem like poverty and decides to declare war on poverty and tax the rich, or declare war on the rich in order to fight poverty, what do you think will never end? Probably poverty, probably inequality, because the incentives in that structure are built to not have the problem solved, because if the problem continues, then you can send more money at that problem and claim a greater reason to attack it even more. And so the incentives are all wrong, the morality of it is all wrong, and the effects in the end are usually counter to what they said was their original aim in the first place. And so I take a lot of when somebody shows you who they are, believe them the first time, right? And so if they're saying their goal is to tax the rich, I believe them. The goal is not to help the poor, or else that would be the battle cry: help the poor. The goal is really an attack on wealth. And just like the final sentence of Animal Farm, when you have somebody come into power in order to try and take down another power, eventually they will start to look just like the power that they tried to take down. And so go look at the net worths of everybody in Congress. Look at the net worth of representatives in the House, of senators, anybody who gets into high positions of power, whether it's the Federal Reserve or the Treasury, and how they flip-flop back and forth between private sector, public sector. You pass laws, you then that benefit some of your buddies that are in high positions, and you get a board seat, or you get an executive position at one of these companies that you've benefited. It's scratch your back, scratch my back. So it's not effective. They're wanting to consolidate power. It is not something that is designed to help the poor, or else the battle cry would be help the poor. It's really an attack on wealth, unless that wealth is in the hands of the state, and that's the crux of it. And when that last sentence of Animal Farm, we looked from the pigs to the humans, and from the humans back to the pigs, we could no longer tell a difference. So that's my rant. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Again, please do not take this the wrong way. Again, I 100% believe we have an obligation to help those less fortunate than ourselves. But coercion and force has no place in that. It is an individual. It has to be done on an individual level, or else the incentives are wrong, the morality is wrong, and the effectiveness is gone. So that's what I think. Let me know what you think, and see you next time.